Hello, today we're going to talk to Paul Mann. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's evening, late in the week, and I need to get this sorted pretty quick. But just enough time to say I'm about to speak to a chap called Paul Mann. He's an English conductor and has worked on many projects, but notably, and the things that maybe people in my field will know him for, is his work with Jon Lord, with Deep Purple and the Conductor for Group and Orchestra, and the Celebrating Jon Lord work that he did at the Royal Albert Hall after Jon Lord's death. He looks like a really interesting guy. He's got a fantastic CV. I want to know what makes him tick. I want to know what gets someone into conducting, and how do you get into conducting if you want to do that as well. And his life with Jon Lord and his interactions with Hammond organs, all fantastic stuff for a complete nerd like me. Let's hope it goes as good as I think it will do. I'll speak to you a bit later on. So, welcome, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Whereabouts are you in the world now? You're knocking around in Europe, aren't you?
I live in Romania these days.
You do? Fantastic.
And it's all Deep Purple's fault, actually. Because I don't know if you remember when we did the concerto tour, 23 years ago nearly.
99, was it? Something like that?
2000, the tour was 2000, I think.
Right.
And the orchestra that did most of the Romanian stretch, the European stretch of the tour, was from here in Cluj. And right. I came back here, as I promised I would do at the end of the tour, to do a normal concert with them. And it sort of started a relationship with the orchestra here, which eventually introduced me to my wife. And so 10 years or so after that, you'd never have thought it, but that's where I ended up.
You're still there. How are you getting on with the language as well? Are you picking it up nicely now?
Well, I'm up and down with the language. I have most people here speak English, so it's a little bit too easy to get away with not really making enough effort. So there's a bit of that. And I had a very good Romanian teacher, actually, who used to come once a week here to the house. And she used to, the rule was that when we opened the door and we started to speak, we would only speak Romanian. And it was great for a while. And then she went off and had a baby and never came back. And so I'm a little bit less good than I would like to be. But
it is a problem, isn't it? How the Europeans are taught so well. English so well, and it makes it really difficult for us to
shaming, really. Yeah, it's shaming. But I think most people here, older people, for example, my wife's parents don't speak any English at all, but most people here speak some English, and a lot of people here speak very good English. And of course, here also there are a lot of Hungarian-speaking people.
My family are from Slovenia.
Ah, right.
So the same thing, you know. But I lived there for a lot of the year when I was younger, before I went to sort of middle and high school.
Yeah.
But their English is just superb. Maybe I won't go over for a couple of years, and then they're just still fluent. You know.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
It's amazing. When I work with the orchestra here, I rehearse in English, mostly because it saves time. If I make mistakes in Romanian, it's annoying and frustrating, and it's quicker if I just do it in English.
It's incredibly talented. So I mean, I wanted to start from, because I'm used to interviewing sort of Hammond organ players and stuff in my comfort zone, and conductors is something I'm fascinated by, but I don't know how do you start? How did you get onto the path that you're on now?
I don't know exactly, because I think probably for most conductors have their own way that they find that comes from their own circumstances and what chances they can create for themselves. Because of course, conducting is different than playing an instrument. You can, but it's not very productive to just sit in a room. And I mean, look, I've got this on my table here.
Ah, yes.
I mean, that's not much use to me without people in front of me. You know, there's only so much you can do to learn the technique and to apply the technique and to develop that. That's what takes experience. And of course, it's a bit of a catch-22 in some ways for conductors. You can't get a chance unless you've already got it. No one will take
Yeah.
a chance on you unless they already know you. So you have to be lucky, which I was. But I think it's funny. I mean, the story has been told, and that the concerto, that John's concerto, had something to do with me wanting to be a conductor. And
Okay.
the story is that because, as you know, my mum's brother, Colin Hart, was Deep Purple's road manager for a long time.
Yeah.
And he used to come back with stuff. One of the things that found its way into my grandma's record collection was the concerto. And I used to listen to it all the time and conduct along to the record. And it was something that
Wow.
must have been a kind of, I don't know whether it was literally a sort of inspiration to be a conductor, or whether it was just a way for me to think about it, you know. And there's one bit in the last movement of the concerto where the meter goes across the bar line. It's mostly with 2 beats and a bar.
Yeah.
And there's just one bit where it goes dun dun da 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 dun dun da da, like that, 3 beats against it. And when I was a kid conducting the record, I always used to do a 3 there, because that's what it sounds like on the record. But that's not what John wrote. So when we came to make the new score, as a little private joke, I asked John to put it in 3, just so that I could continue to conduct it for real the way I conducted it in front of the mirror when I was a kid.
Oh my God, that's amazing! So all the way back in '69.
So that's in the score only because of my little childhood fantasy. So yeah, in some way, the concerto is sort of part of my DNA as a conductor. That's I think you can say that.
And so did you? Start off maybe as classical piano, wasn't it? When you started?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to be a very strange child to want to be a conductor in the first place without actually learning an instrument first. I think and for me, the piano was always the stories that my mother tells, still tells to anyone who will listen, is that apparently on my first birthday, my great grandfather picked me up and put me on his knee and at the piano. And he took my hand and put my hand onto the keys, and the excitement, the reaction was instant, and I was hitting the thing in all directions and couldn't be kept away from it. And so by the time I was 5, I think they sort of thought, well, maybe he'd better be taught how to do this properly, you know. And so the piano was my first love, musically speaking, and the conducting thing came much later. I mean, I was into my 20s before I had any real opportunity to even try to conduct.
And how does one get a conducting fellowship? Because that's sort of that happened. Was it Northern Ballet Company?
Well, the Northern Ballet, that was it. Was all a little bit upside down. I mean, as I said, when I needed to try to find a way to get some experience. And the Northern Ballet Theatre, which is still going strong, it's a very interesting company. Always was, and at that time was run by Christopher Gable, who you might know if you're a Ken Russell fan. He was in a lot of those early Ken Russell films. He was in the Delius film. He was in the notorious Richard Strauss film. He was in The Music Lovers. And he was both a great dancer and a great actor. And I think his interest was in making ballet essentially a dramatic storytelling thing. And so I got the chance to be assistant conductor there, to work with him, and with absolutely no experience at all, to get to conduct 3 or 4 performances a week. So, you know, that's wonderful, because every time you make a mess of something, you can come back the next day and try and fix it. And you learn much faster than you otherwise would. And after a few years of that, I think I felt that I needed to grow a little more. And I managed to get onto a fellowship in conducting at the Royal Northern College in Manchester, which is still, I think, pretty much the best breeding ground for British conductors in the country. And And from there, I got assistant jobs with the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, then with the London Symphony Orchestra. And that's where the Purple connection comes into the picture, because I was already assistant conductor of the LSO when the Purple project came along in 99. So that's the kind of potted history, I guess.
That's great for me. I'm sure there'll be people watching this who think, how do you get into that kind of thing? So the first thing was the fellowship, and then it kind of dominoes, I guess, goes up.
Well, yes, I suppose if you're lucky, and I was, and people give you opportunities. They see something in you that makes them want to try to encourage you, and I was lucky in that respect. That a lot of people helped, a lot of people gave me chances, and of course, the thing then is to try to make the most of them.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, you're out again with Concerto, aren't you, this year?
We are. It sort of snowballed. I got invited actually just before the lockdown. We got this in just towards the end of 2019, I think, in Quebec City in Canada. I got invited to do the concerto there.
Right. And
they wanted someone involved in that. Initially they wanted someone from the Purple family, and it wasn't possible. But I thought, well, let's ask Bruce, because Bruce Dickson was, he was on the studio recording of the concerto, and he was in the Celebrating Jon Lord show in London, and he's an old friend of the band and friend of John's. And so I just emailed him and said, would you be interested in coming to Canada and do this with me? And instantly he said yes, it'd be great. And so I think that's how that started. Bernard Welz, the drummer, came to Canada, saw the shows, and I think it was really his drive and his impetus that got behind the idea of taking this on the road. And so we've been we did one show in Hungary last year in Győr, which was really enjoyable. And now, we've got some shows in Eastern Europe and down in South America, in Brazil.
And you've got Tanya straight from the Whitesnake.
Yeah, I've never met her yet. I've corresponded a little bit on email, and of course I've seen her, and
professional.
She seems like a fantastic musician and really an interesting person as well to have around in the band.
Very precise, yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to be a nice new dynamic for us, because last one we did was with Roger, of course.
Of course, yeah. And John O'Hara. Now, it's not a secret. I'm a big fan of Jethro Tull as well. Right. So having John O'Hara in there, that must be quite cool as well. Have you played with him yet? Have you met him
yet? John was the keyboard player on the Hungary show last year, and he's also a very interesting musician. Very much someone that I think John would have appreciated, the same kind of range of of musical interests, and so he understands very well the world of the concerto, where the concerto's coming from. Essentially, right. Those two worlds at once.
Yeah.
So no, it's a really good team. It's a really great team, and it'll be nice to. I think actually Deep Purple are in South America at the same time.
Oh, really?
I noticed this the other day. They've got some shows. I think there's pretty much. I don't know whether they're following us around or we're following them around. I don't know, but we're at the same time.
They're following you.
Yeah.
They're definitely following you. And that'd be great. You should give them a call and see if you can get them to pop over. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I haven't seen them for a while as a unit, as a group. Occasionally, I meet the individuals, but I haven't seen them as a band for a long time.
They played in Birmingham, UK, and I missed them. But some friends of mine did go, and they said, because obviously Steve's left now.
Yes.
And the new guy they've got in is just the tickets. Basically, he's doing a fine job in that, and they seem
so I hear
energized and good to go.
Yeah, I haven't seen them yet with Simon. I haven't met him. I don't know anything about him other than his reputation.
Yeah, exactly, which is a fine reputation.
Yeah,
I was very pleased when John O'Hara finally got a Hammond organ as well, because he played in Jethro Tull for ages, and then they reprised Thick as a Brick, and they did a Thick as a Brick 2, and the organ came in there, which was great. But he's listed as a conductor as well, isn't he? So how does that work with you?
He really talk a bit about conducting, because I think he has conducted his own stuff. I think he's written quite a bit of music in his own right, and I think he's often conducted that. And when we talked about conducting, and he seems to understand it from both sides, which is, as a player and as a conductor, that's a good thing to have.
Kind of leave him alone. You can leave him alone. Safe pair of hands in that corner.
Well, yeah. Well, I think everybody understands. We all that was actually a very useful experience to do it in Hungary last year, because we all got a feel for it. And although Tanya is going to be new in the group, she'll pick this up very fast, and she'll fit the dynamic, I'm sure, really well. And one thing that all my experience with doing this piece has shown after all these years, it's a really well written piece. It's a really Jon knew so well what he was doing, and everything just fits. And as long as you've got good musicians and people who are prepared to collaborate in the spirit of the piece, it works really well.
It pops up onto Sky Arts, both recordings, and it's one of those things. I always have to watch it, whatever time it is. Oh God, it's 11 o'clock. I've got to watch this now.
I heard they were showing somebody told me this. They were showing the original Albert Hall.
That's right.
But in a kind of shortened version, someone said.
I don't know. I didn't see that one.
Okay.
I didn't see that one. I would have seen the whole one. But it's really interesting, because I think they did it the next week. They did the new version. So I taped the one, and then I kind of watched them a day apart, the old and the new. And it, apart from clearly the recording is a lot better in the second one. That's but I noticed that the on the first one, the band, because you'll know this one very well, it's what I used to listen to when I grew up. But it's more, it jars a bit more. And the newer one is more complimentary. I'm not just saying that, but I do prefer the newer one.
I think there was the way that it was talked about, the way Jon always talked about it, certainly the way he always characterized that 69 experience, was as something that was essentially adversarial between the orchestra and the band. There is that story of them all being ushered into the Henry Wood Hall, which is where the orchestra used to rehearse, still used as a rehearsal hall and recording studio, where Rudolf Kemper, who was a very distinguished conductor of the old school, was rehearsing them, I think Brahms 4.
Right.
And the rehearsal was momentarily stopped while these long-haired layabouts were shown into the rehearsal. And of course, the orchestra of that time, which would have been entirely male and entirely middle-aged male, thought that these young guys with their facial hair and their long hair and their, were, interlopers. What are they doing here? And this sort of set the tone. And I think that Malcolm's way of handling it, which was a combination of charm and force and a kind of force of nature, really, as he was, saved the whole thing. It could have been a complete and utter disaster. They had very little time to rehearse. The orchestra was not very interested in it. They didn't see the value of it. And yet there's a frisson to it. There's an atmosphere about it.
Atmosphere, that's the word,
which I think is partly born of that conflict, and the atmosphere of ours was completely different because there was no conflict. The orchestra loved it. They were completely up for it. They were full of respect for the band, and there was a mutual respect, which I guess was also the result of it being 1999 and not 1969. Deep Purple in 69 were, hardly known.
Correct.
And now in 99, they're legends. And of course, the orchestra's attitude to them was going to be different. So,
it was. I found with the first one, with the 69 one, I thought I got that impression that Ritchie wanted to really try and push people around and be really noisy and musically kind of obnoxious, and I think that worked well in that one.
Yeah, but his playing is astounding. I mean,
totally. There's hardly any overdrive on it, and he's playing a Gibson ES335. How how on earth he was doing that in '69.
Yeah. I mean, the sheer kind of, that big guitar solo, the famous long, whatever it is, 6-minute guitar solo that he does, which was a real statement of intent on his part. But if that's all it was, it wouldn't be special. What makes it special is that it's just so endlessly inventive and musically interesting. And when you think it's running out of steam, it goes up a notch, and it's just fantastic.
I'm a big fan. You can almost hear the idea, see the ideas come here, and then go down to the fingers, can't you? And he's going up and he's feeling for the notes.
I mean, that's all great players are like that. John was like that. Steve Morse is like that. Roger is like that. Don Airey is like that. There is no block between the mental process and the fingers.
Yes.
So the technical virtuosity is such that there's no idea that they can possibly have that they couldn't realize instantaneously on the instrument.
It is amazing.
And that's what characterizes all great improvising musicians, whether they're jazz musicians or rock musicians or classical musicians. And that was what was, for me, one of the most memorable things about that tour was just every night was different. We did 30 odd concerts, and every night was differently different. Some days was more different than other days, but every night was something fresh and new. And the orchestra, which was not used to that, you could feel them being stimulated and challenged by that.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask how. So the orchestra are going quiet whilst the band are having their kind of their statement and their fight back against the classical, or however it was pitched. And if it's different on night 3 and night 4, do they feel, are they uncomfortable because they think, oh, where am I?
Well, I think the way the concerto is written is that they're never cast adrift. When the orchestra is not playing, they always know that they just have to sit there and wait to see the next thing from the conductor.
Right.
So they're never sitting there thinking, what are we going to do next? What's going to happen now? Because then they know all they have to do is just wait for me to show where we are, and then everything is fine. So if the band decides they want to play for longer, or they want to do something else, if the drum solo is going to be a bit longer, or the guitar solo, one of the things you notice in the first movement in our version, Steve Morse tended to make his cadenza towards the end of the first movement longer than Richie did.
Uh-huh.
And Richie's initial big long solo was a bit shorter in Steve's version. That the proportions of it were different. But time and time again, with all the orchestras, I can sense, because you see, because one of the things conductors, of course, are always in touch with is the eyes of all the players in front.
Right.
All these pairs of eyes are looking at, and you sense that. And of course, when there's a frisson in the orchestra, when you look around, you see people going, the eyes going wider, and them looking at each other, going, "What is that? What is he?" And looking out to say, "What's he doing?" And this kind of admiration. And one of the big differences between classical musicians and rock musicians in general is that we tend to, we tend to work from this all the time, written pages of music.
Yes.
And we devote ourselves to trying to render these pages of music as accurately and as faithfully in all the detail as we possibly can, and with a huge amount of respect for, everything the composer tells us in this kind of blueprint. And we are never really called upon to improvise. And if we were, probably we wouldn't know what to do. So when we see musicians who do that naturally, it's an inspiring thing. And that's what the concerto does very effectively. It brings together those of us who are basically tied to the page, and musicians who are not. And
I've noticed that, and of the classical musicians that I've met, improvising is not that's not their big thing. And I'm a self-taught player, and I'll be more improvising than anything else, because that's about all I can do. How do you find that? Do you allow the orchestra to do anything, or is it all on the page, all down to your guidance?
Well, I don't know. I think conductors, if they are wise, they are listening all the time
Right.
to what the musicians are offering, particularly at the beginning of a relationship with an orchestra. When you arrive on a Monday morning and you start rehearsing for the first time, it's a good idea to listen before you say anything, and really listen to what they're doing, and not listen to the version that might be playing in your head, but really listen to them. And sometimes, because a player can offer you something that didn't occur to you, or that might be something different than what you were imagining.
Yeah.
So that's an important part of it. But I think this thing about improvising, I mean, it wasn't always thus. If you look back into the 19th century and you look at the great, even just to speak about pianists, not violinists or anything else, the great pianist composers, even go back further and look at Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven and Schumann and then Liszt, and all of those people were as famous as improvisers, as performers, as they were as composers. And that element of being a composer performer has somehow gradually become filtered out, and the two disciplines have become separated.
Yeah.
And you're now basically one or the other, unless you're exceptional. And so one of the joys of this, for me, is to bring those two things together. And the fact that it's a combination of musical styles is almost secondary. It's the fact that we have a rock band and a symphony orchestra. To me, that's almost secondary to the bringing together of these two elements of musical performance that history has kind of torn apart.
Yeah, I think maybe that was the magic of it at the time. I mean, I remember on the 1969, the classical musicians didn't seem very impressed with anything that was. So when they weren't playing, they looked more bored. And the ones that you did, everyone seemed to be part of the big team. They're all the team.
I think that was just, as I say, that was something that I was fortunate enough to be able to tap into, because I mean, I'm not sure. I've sometimes thought about this. How would I have handled it if I'd had to do what Malcolm Arnold did?
Yeah.
It was much harder for him than it was for me. Much harder. Because he had a recalcitrant orchestra. He had an uncooperative orchestra. He had almost no time.
Right.
And, and also from a technical point of view, it was much more chaotic. I mean, the band is turned down almost to acoustic levels in the 69 version, just so the orchestra could be heard.
Right.
Nowadays, of course, you can amplify a symphony orchestra in a really natural way. That means that instead of bringing the orchestra up to meet the band, you just do it the other way around, and slightly, so that you align the band. The band plays at a slightly lower level than it would normally.
Yeah.
But I mean, the technical advances that make it possible to really balance the acoustic symphony orchestra and the amplified band are so much more sophisticated than they were in 69. And we had such a great team, the late lamented Maury McMillan and Rob Hodgkinson, the monitor engineer, and all of those people that made this possible to do it so well from a technical point of view, because it's important in this piece to do that.
It jumped out at me, certainly, and I bet it does to everybody else, that technically it's so well recorded, and that's possibly what I was getting at when I was saying it seemed a lot smoother because of the balance and the edges are off there. I thought.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm going to talk about Jon Lord because I'm a bit of a fan, but this is about you. But I'm quite interested. I was at the Royal Albert Hall. I watched the back of your head for a couple of hours, I think, at the Celebrating. I was at the Sunflower Jam before 2 years before, possibly, I think it was, and then. But how do you go about setting up for that? Because you've got a canon of work that everyone, like you say, will listen to, but also they're playing the jukebox in their mind, aren't they? And did you did you write the score for that? Do you get involved in that?
How?
How?
You mean choosing the music for that concert?
Well, I guess the music's, yes, I mean that, but also, when I think the first time I was watching it this morning. I watched them both this morning. Like Soldier of Fortune comes in, and the orchestra, and nice and quiet. It's a beautiful way that they build in throughout the night and how they get it. But who's writing the score for what they're playing?
Different people. Soldier of Fortune,
Right.
that's John's arrangement.
Okay.
John orchestrated that to use in his own shows, and because Steve Balsamo, I think, used to sing that with John on his later orchestral shows.
Right.
So basically, there were three people responsible for that. John himself, an old friend of mine called Richard Wilds, who did the Mark III stuff. He did Burn, Now You Keep On Moving, and This Time Around.
Mm-hmm.
He also did the arrangement on the Pace Ashton Lord song.
My favourite.
And then I
Perfect Strangers as well, wasn't there? Did you do the Perfect Strangers one then?
No, that's John.
Okay.
That's John. So that great big long orchestral introduction.
Yeah.
It sounds like a sort of Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody or something like that. That's John. He did that. And then I did the rest. So I did the new stuff, the Above and Beyond, and the Uncommon Man, and those kind of things. So it was a pretty big operation of producing orchestral material and getting everything together. It took about a year to get it all together, and of course, deciding what to do. That was a lot of meetings and discussions with the two families, with Ian's family and with Vicky Lord, and John's family, and finding a way to make it representative as much as we could without it lasting 2 days. Because
I could have been there all night.
Really it could easily have been at least 2 concerts, and I think it was a good decision not to do the concerto at all.
Right.
The idea, I think, was the concerto's been done. We don't need to do that again. There are plenty of other aspects of John's music that we could use.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was also a slightly mischievous idea not to do Smoke on the Water just for once.
Yeah.
We could have a concert with Deep Purple in it that didn't include Smoke on the Water. I thought that was quite nice, not to do that, and to make the encore was Hush instead.
That was brilliant, and that caught a lot of people out.
Yeah.
Although I was sat next to some tourists that had come over from Asia, and they just wanted to talk throughout. So obviously they went, Royal Albert, all beautiful. Let's get a couple of tickets. Let's see what's on. And they were talking all the way through the Pace Ashton Law stuff, and I was getting more and more annoyed. At one point, we turned around and, as Paddington, give them a good stare, and they stopped for about 30 seconds and carried on. And you just, because the good thing about the Albert Hall is it's not terrific volume, is it? So you can pick everything out, all the separations there.
It's a strange building, isn't it? Because I mean, if you go to a normal classical concert in there, you can see a prom in there. It can be as effective as a space for intimate music as it can be as a space for something on a huge scale.
Yeah.
I mean, to be really honest, the one part of that concert that I'm proudest of was the little thing with Jeremy Irons.
Yeah.
I only did that because nobody else could or wanted to. I wasn't expecting to play at all that night. But because that came, as you probably know, from the shows that John did with John Mortimer, where Mortimer used to read bits of poems and talk about his life, and it was what I saw a couple of them, and they were wonderful. And to that poem, John improvised something, and so for the show, I had to kind of transcribe. I had to write out from one of those what he did and try to sort of fit it with with Jeremy Irons, and we had almost no time to rehearse it. We ran it through just before 7 o'clock, just before they opened the doors.
Really?
That's the only time we got to do it. And of
Oh,
course,
God.
when you're standing up there and waving your arms around and moving a lot like that, suddenly to be still and to stop your hands shaking and play this very quiet, still sort of stuff, that's the moment of that concert that I'm most proud of, and that one that somehow I felt that moment closest to Jon than at any other point in that.
It was. I mean, it's happening to me now, right? The hairs are coming up, but it was so nice that section. You could have heard a pin drop on occasions. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing because it must have been a fantastic evening, but obviously a very sad evening as well. So it must be hard for you to keep the meter and keep your energy levels up.
I must admit, I didn't find it at all sad. I mean, I think that, of course, I mean, I miss Jon. I mean, he was such a huge presence in my life, and he was one of the best friends I ever had. And of course, I miss him. But my constant relationship with his music and the part that still plays in my musical life is so present and real and ongoing. I
got to feel that connection.
The connection is absolutely alive all the time.
That's beautiful. That's really nice.
And although I miss not being able to call him up, and I miss his company, and all the things that everybody says about him, which are all true. He was the most amazing bunch of guys all at once. But yeah, of course you miss that. But in that sense, I went once to look at the gravestone, which is in a little churchyard, because the funeral at the funeral the gravestone wasn't there. That was added later, and I just went and I looked at it and I thought, yeah, but you're not there. He's not there. I don't, he's in all this stuff, that we're about to take on the road again.
That must be really nice. And from a musician's point of view, when I play in a few bands, and one of them's a Deep Purple tribute band, and when you put your fingers where he put them, there is something, isn't there? Yeah. There's something about that connection, and you go, oh, I see. So he must have done that with his fingers and moved them there. And when you're learning songs and trying to get fully inside them,
one of the things that I notice about Jon as a would-be keyboard player is, I think it must be very difficult as an improviser to stop your fingers doing just what they want to do. Because the tendency then is that they do the same thing all the time. You rely on the same 5 or 6 kind of stock in trade licks, And Jon, although he had his signatures in his playing, and that's why one of the reasons you can spot instantly that it's him. Yeah. The fact that he allowed his imagination and he stimulated his imagination to the point where he himself didn't know what he was going to do. And there's a moment in the solo, the one that's on the 99 concerto, where he gets stuck in a phrase and he starts, no, he's repeating this phrase over and over again. And I remember him saying afterwards, I didn't know how long I was going to do that for. I didn't know how am I going to get out of this? I have no idea. And every time I hear it, I remember that to be able to take a risk under such a big spotlight, knowing the things being recorded and knowing how high the stakes are, and yet not being afraid to just go where it leads you. That was, that's an incredible thing. And if you listen to, live shows, all those live shows that you can easily get to listen to now, and Richie was the same. That's why they were so well matched, and that's why with Steve they were so well matched. The fearless kind of not being afraid to just go where your own imagination is leading you. One of the things I learned at the first rehearsal I had with the whole band for the concerto show we did in a little studio in Putney. And there's a photo somewhere of the whole band and me sitting at the piano trying to play the concerto, the orchestral part on the piano.
Right. Yeah.
And at that rehearsal, I remember Jon was kind of giving them instructions, here, just watch me there. And there he said, somewhere to one of them, he said, and I'll give you a horse's eyes there. I heard this expression. I'll give you a horse's eyes.
Never heard that before.
It's that kind of, wait, something's going to happen.
Love it.
And that was a purple shorthand that I learnt in that very first rehearsal, horse's eyes.
Yeah, and because it's coming, don't you? That means that's like the next time around we're going to go somewhere different or whatever. And
one of Richie's most mischievous qualities is that he'd do the horse's eyes, but the game is sometimes the gesture is so small that he's really trying it on to see if you really switched on enough to notice that he's giving you a signal.
Because that's really funny because he used to do that shaking his head thing, and most people would assume that he's really getting into that in the solo. Yeah. But actually, what he's telling the rest of the band, we're going to go around the head again. Don't do that. That's those kind of. I love those signs.
I used to love the kind of communication that was going on the whole time.
On sticks, eyes on stalks. Well, horse's eyes, right? So the eyes are on sticks, and especially with Richie, sort of because he'd be like this, Yeah. So and when you play in bands, you get used to if someone's shoulder drops, right? We know that he's putting a foot pedal down, and that means he's gonna go to the next bit. And you have all these little micro gestures that you have to pick up on.
And I think it's also it's an instinctive thing. This happens in orchestras too. Somehow you just without anybody saying it, obviously you can't say anything.
Yeah.
Without even necessarily an explicit gesture, you just know that the clarinet player needs a little more time to turn that corner. Or conversely, he's running out of breath and he needs you to just give him a little, or somehow you sense these things. And it's exactly the same in the band. It was the way that they heard each other and almost because they knew each other so well, instinctively responding, not only responding to signs and signals and explicit, things, but somehow unspoken things, and all kinds of magic happened that way too.
Yeah, musically catching. The ones I really like are when Jon and Ian, who clearly, obviously, were very close for other reasons, but they would try to catch up because Jon's view was that he was a rhythm guitar player stuck on a Hammond, so it's all about the rhythm, and he'd catch on those snares, and when it was a jam and it was perfect, and the song would be fading out, and you go, no, don't fade out. I want to hear what, because it's all hell must have broken loose just after they stopped pressing record or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was just it's the one thing that makes it worth doing. If you're going to go around the world playing essentially the same bunch of songs repeatedly, the one thing that's going to make it interesting is all of these elements that come and go, in different ways each time you play it. Jon was, I think, as you say, as much a part of the rhythm section as he was a soloist. Oh, yeah. And he could come and go in and out of that just as a guitar player does. The example is the beginning of Hush.
Oh yeah.
All that just playing a keyboard like a set of congas.
Bongos, yeah, absolutely, and it took me a while to learn that as well.
It's not as easy as it looks, He made it just look like but
you're absolutely right. He's a genius at it. But And he used that right the way up to all the way through Whitesnake as well. You'd hear it popping up in the background, kind of just like a little rhythmical thing, and the digga is quite a nice one. So he's just and I'm out kind of thing. And it was like a way to visualize what was going on.
Yeah.
Musically, because he also used to do before a solo, maybe he'd do it. I'm coming, kind of. He'd just go,
yeah.
Like, here I come, I'm coming up,
Yeah.
And I've mercilessly stolen those techniques,
Well, if you're going to steal, steal good stuff.
Yeah, right. Still for the best, right, I guess.
Yeah.
How was it? I wanted to ask you, how was it? Obviously, you conduct music that is sometimes very old, and people want to hear it exactly right, and then you find yourself conducting music with the composer in the room with you.
Yeah.
Does that change? How's that dynamic? Because they're the owner, but you're the interpreter, or is it more of a team?
It depends on the composer. Some are very controlling, and some are more collaborative. Jon was always very collaborative.
Really?
He was clear about what he wanted. He knew what he wanted, and he knew how to get it, and he knew what he'd written. Sometimes you work with composers, and you can tell that they don't actually know their own music as well as they should.
As well as you do.
But so Jon, he knew what he wanted, and he knew how to go about it. But he was very responsive to suggestions from players, and he was very responsive to the kind of discussions that arise, when a conductor and a composer are working together. And of course, one of the things working with a living composer, one of the things that does is it changes a little bit your perspective on the music of dead composers. Not being able to ring up, Schumann or Stravinsky or whoever, and ask them questions about their music doesn't preclude the possibility that they might entertain ideas and suggestions and things that you would think would only come from being able to speak to them while they're alive. Composers are sometimes extremely open to these things, and sometimes they're not. I had an experience with Harrison Birtwistle, who was one of the greatest of contemporary composers. And I was doing a piece of his, and I had prepared. He was present at the last rehearsal, and I had prepared what I thought was a list of quite intelligent questions about this very complicated music. And I asked him this question. I can't remember what was some detail about something. And he looked at me and he went, "I don't fucking know." Well, that's great. Maybe if I asked Beethoven or Schubert or whoever, maybe he'd say the same thing.
I love it.
I love it. And just how am I supposed to know about that? I only wrote it.
That's amazing.
So I think that sometimes the experience with living composers can make you realize that, as I was saying, all this extreme fidelity to the page, it only gets you so far.
Yeah, I guess so. That's incredible. I guess when you realize that the composer hasn't thought the rest through, maybe that gives you a little bit more freedom then in your mind. You think, okay, right, I can take this and I can interpret it a little bit.
It may be not that they haven't thought it through. They might have thought it through very clearly, but they might also be interested in, a different point of view. On the other hand, they might just be saying, just do it, just do what I wrote. Ravel was famous for insisting that there was an exchange with Paul Wittgenstein, who was a pianist, a one-handed pianist. He had only his left hand. He'd had an injury, which meant that and Ravel wrote this concerto for left hand only. And Wittgenstein was known for taking rather a free attitude to the music. And Ravel objected very strongly to this, and there was an altercation, and Wittgenstein apparently said to Ravel, performers are not your slaves. And Ravel's response was words to the effect of, "That's exactly what they are."
Yes, they are. Interesting, but of course that was the record of the day, wasn't it? I mean, the live performance was what we would have now as the recorded piece. It had to be.
Yeah.
I guess it was representing the composer in such a way that he wanted to keep it like that. It's interesting style. About instruments a little bit. What instruments do you have at your home? Is it just a piano that you have?
I don't even have a piano anymore. It's a very odd thing, because there was a time in my life when I couldn't go for a day without touching the piano.
Yeah.
And now I hardly play at all.
Right.
There was a moment, maybe about 15 years ago, maybe a little more than that, when I realized that I couldn't do both. If I wanted to be a conductor and I wanted to take that as seriously and for it to be as all-consuming as it has to be, there weren't enough hours in the day to be a pianist as well. And those who can do both, those Barenboims and Ashkenazis and those kinds of people, are really exceptional. For me, it was just impossible, and so I don't have a piano here anymore, and whenever I'm working with a pianist, I do feel that pull, that strong kind of. It's as if the keyboard is saying, "Come, you want to touch me. Come." And I feel that strong connection still, but in a way that is almost abstract. It's not really a part of me anymore.
Right.
And just occasionally, I might have to do something where I need to go and try something out at the piano, and usually I can find a way to do that if I need to. And I've got a couple of MIDI keyboards here which I can use if I need. Pick
them up.
And
we were talking before I pressed record, the same thing about Jon Lord again, and he certainly not having a Hammond organ in his house.
Yeah, he practiced the piano quite a lot. And one of the things he used to say is that if he'd come off a long tour, he needed to get his left hand going, because of course essentially he's using his right hand mostly only, and using the left hand in a supplementary way. But to play the piano, it's a different touch, it's a different and if you listen to Jon playing the piano, for example, if you listen to him playing something like Pictured Within, or something where he's playing in a very gentle way, you really see the sense that he had for pianistic color and for the detail of what's possible on a piano that's not possible on an instrument that doesn't react to touch, essentially.
Yes.
So he had a nice piano, which he used to work at. He used to compose at it quite a lot. I think his strongest sort of relationship in some ways was with the piano rather than with the Hammond organ. And so I think I don't know what he would have done if he'd had. I mean, there was a Hammond organ in the studio in the last few years. He had some kind of working relationship with Hammond where they gave him an instrument, but I don't think he ever actually practiced on it at home.
No, gets enough of that on tour, I suppose. It's not many nights. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Well, where can people see you now? We spoke at the top, didn't we, about the concerto? Whereabouts are you going now?
That's a very good question. I still haven't memorized the itinerary. But we start in Romania. We start in Bucharest. And wait, I've got it here.
I'll list it in the description as well.
What are we doing? Bucharest on the 15th of March. And then we move to Sofia, and we do 2 shows there on the 18th and 19th. And then we're going to Sarajevo You know, where Bruce went during the war. There's that. Have you seen that amazing film?
It's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely,
just incredible. Well, we're going back. We're going there. Zagreb on the 20. Sarajevo's 22nd. Zagreb is 24th. And Ljubljana on the 25th.
That's where my family live.
Well, we'll see you at that one, I hope. And on the 2nd of April, we're in Czech Republic, in Olomouc. Olomouc, is that how you say it? I don't know.
Not sure.
And then we have a little gap, about a week, and then we go down to South America, to Brazil. And at the moment, we're just waiting to hear whether we have an extra show in Sao Paulo. We might have two. The first one's on the 15th of April. And Curitiba we have on the 19th, maybe a second show there too. Rio on the 21st, and Porto Alegre on the 25th. So that's, what is it, 13 concerts, something like that?
Yeah, a lot of people. And are you looking past that at the moment for your next project, or are you just focusing directly on what we're doing at the moment?
Well, there are things coming up after that obviously with my other hat on that I have to think about. Some recordings and stuff like this, but and we might do some more of these next year. I think what my understanding is that we've got some interest from other territories, including Japan,
Very nice.
which means we might do some more next year. But of course, Bruce is so busy.
Yeah,
and Iron Maiden are just constantly on the road that their planning is already advanced for 2-3 years ahead. So finding availability with him is the problem.
And who would have thought that kid in 1969 sat in front of the mirror, and now you're a classical rock star, aren't you? You're touring with all these guys.
It is a strange thing that, and I don't mind it. I'm actually on the contrary. I'm really proud of it. That if people know something about me, it tends to be that. It tends to be that I did this thing with Deep Purple.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky that I have that. A lot of people can have a very distinguished career in classical music without having that kind of a calling card. And I don't mind. There are some people, I think, in this in the classical side of this that take a very unfortunate kind of rather sort of negative view of it. It's almost as if, it's a very strange thing. It's almost as if the fact that I'm as comfortable working with a rock band as I am with a Mahler symphony, that somehow makes me a less good musician than if I only did one of those things.
Probably the opposite, isn't it?
And somehow the view of some people is that's there's something suspect. In the same way that if you're I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example that I don't want to make it sound like I'm comparing myself with much greater people. But you remember Clive James?
Yep.
The writer, he was one of the most sort of learned and erudite of poets and literary critics and all the rest. But of course, what we remember him for is, putting absurd Japanese game shows on TV
on a Sunday after 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and it's somehow if you're comfortable in popular media as you are in the so-called sort of more rarefied atmosphere of other things, that somehow is suspect for some people, and it's a shame because, I mean, if I look back in the influence that the Deep Purple's music had, that Rainbow's music had, particularly in some respects, Rainbow more because I was 11 in '76 when I first saw Rainbow.
Wow!
And I was taken to a show, and I was put on the. Maybe it wasn't 7. Maybe it was late. Maybe it was 77. I don't remember now. It wasn't Tony Carey on the keyboard. It was David Stone on the keyboard.
77, yeah.
So it was 77, and I was put on a flight case right behind David. I reconnected a bit with David on Facebook recently, and I think he.
Me too. He might be on one of these. Well, I might interview him soon. Actually, we were chatting over Christmas.
I think he wasn't quite sure who I was. I was trying to explain, and I don't know if he understood anything. But what I remember is that the playback, the tape playback, the "We Must Be Over the Rainbow."
Oh yes, yeah.
And the sound, the way that hit me was something I'll just never forget. And I think the impact of that and the subsequent occasions. I mean, a few years later, I went to a later incarnation of Rainbow, and Don, my uncle Colin, persuaded Don to allow me to try out the keyboards. And I remember playing Don's CS80 on stage at Newcastle City Hall at the sound check. Somewhere, me with Don at age 15.
15. Oh yes. Oh my God.
And you know, and that's enough to turn a young man's head, an impressionable young man's head. And I sometimes think that, you know, if I'd taken a different turning when I went through the door marked music, you know, if I'd turned left instead of right, you know, I don't think I have the talent to be a rock and roll keyboard player, but I certainly have the desire. And there's certainly a part of me now that still has that itch, you know, because it's
incredible. That's incredible. I mean, wouldn't want to try and buy a CS80 now, by the way, just to get into a bit of technical stuff. That's so expensive now.
I've got a software version on my computer, just to play with. Excellent. I've got the Arturia, you know, version, which is, if you play it through a MIDI keyboard, it gives enough to give you an idea, but no, it's nothing like the real thing. But you need about 20 grand or something, don't you know?
Yeah, 20,000 quid. And that was the Poly Aftertouch, wasn't it? And I don't know what the next keyboard along has. They haven't really taken off, did it? That
I don't know, but I remember that. I remember being able to press down into the key and it did something like that. I remember that strip. That did the, you know, my favorite. If I've told Don this, so he knows. One of my favorite 16-bar solos in the world is the one on Spotlight Kid, which is that's a CS80 solo, and it sounds like it. And because he does all these smears and stuff, and that's done with that strip, you know, of them.
That makes sense.
And I absolutely just fantastic playing.
And I've never seen a sound engineer be able to get that across live.
No,
it's always really down. And people would pick a Mini Moog to do it in Rainbow or whatever. But it never really came across the same way live, I don't think, which is a shame.
I never talked to Jon very much about synthesizers. I mean, because his identity was so strongly invested in the Hammond, and he used synthesizers, but Don I associate much more as, I mean, he's a great Hammond player too, but he had a very strong identity as a synthesizer player, and that had a huge influence on me at that age. And still now when I see him, I think like,
all those years ago, you know, the intro to I'm going to say Eyes of the World, I think, on Down to Earth. That, for me, that's what Don is. He's worked that through. He's worked out all the parts, and he's come in with a thing and said, "Listen to this," and it's got all that grandeur of a piece.
And it's still opening Deep Purple shows now. It's based on Mars from the Planets by Halls.
Yes.
Dun, 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 dun. That's from the, and now every Deep Purple show opens with
beautiful
Mars.
Well, I hadn't made that connection from that time. It's a cracker. He did really well in that band, I thought.
Yeah.
And some of the production has trouble these days. I think, you know, the album, you have to get your head into the frame of mind about the way it's produced and stuff. But the music and the playing in there is still as great as it ever was.
I do remember Don saying, when he was showing me around all these amazing instruments, which for me at the time were just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And I think he could see that my head was spinning,
Yeah.
And he said, but mind you, not one of these is as good as a grand piano.
Oh, that's nice. So that kind of centers you, doesn't
So
it?
I think he just kind of put me back on the ground, okay,
Oh, that's lovely.
don't be deterred. And so yeah, it's interesting for me that, I mean, I see it in some ways as a sort of double influence, because of course I met Don before I met Jon,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't have anything like the sort of personal relationship with Don that I have with Jon, but still a very strong musical influence, because it was so impressionable. And I guess if I'd been just a few years younger, I would have gone to see Deep Purple before the first split up, and maybe the perspective would have been slightly different.
Yeah, it's interesting, is it? And I just tuned into keyboards for some reasons. I mean, someone let me did me a copy of Machine Head, and then that was it. I was gone. But then I'd go on to the Gillan side of things with Colin Towns. Of course, he's a lovely composer now, and you see his name pop up every now and again on TV in the credits and things like that. And he used the Yamaha organ, and he used to overdrive that old Yamaha organ, YD40 or something like that. I can't think it was called. I can't remember which one it was. But he refused to use a C3 because he was I'm not Jon Lord.
Yeah, right.
So here's Ian Gillan, but I'm not Jon Lord. So I need I want a dirty sustain instrument, but I can't use a Hammond. So what else is around? And he used the Yamaha one, JD. I'll put it in the description what it was, because I can't remember what it was.
That's interesting. No, I mean, I like his playing very much, and there's an album I had at the time which is now almost impossible to get hold of. I think it was a movie score called Full Circle.
Okay.
Of Colin Towns, which I just thought was beautiful, and he was one of those people who had a very good sense of a really resonant idea, something that sticks in your head, and for that reason, really good composer for film, for TV.
Yeah, he's done well with
that. I never met him, so I don't know him, but I know his playing.
I wanted to kind of close with a question about you and about composing. If someone was watching this, or someone's thinking, and we spoke earlier on about how do you get into conducting and your journey through that. If you had a single piece of advice to give somebody who was in front of that mirror, and he's doing that, what do you think would be the best, most efficient piece of advice that you could give somebody?
That's hard to say, because everyone approaches it in a different way. But I think that the most important thing actually would be to get rid of the mirror. I mean, I will willingly admit to standing in front of a mirror when I was a child, but I don't think I've ever done it since then. Because of course, it's exactly like when you stand in front of the mirror in the bathroom in the morning. You rearrange your face in a way that you want to see yourself. You don't do what your face normally does,
Yes,
and when you, as a conductor, if you stand in front of the mirror, what you're doing is you're playing to the mirror, rather than, of course, really doing what you would be doing with the real people in front of you.
Yes, of course.
And I think that's the thing that players latch onto. If they sense that the person in front of them is for real, he's not playing to the gallery, he's not conducting for the audience, and he's not choreographing, and he's but is there to represent the composer and to be the music, then they respond in kind. Orchestral players are really good at sniffing out phonies, and and so I think that's the advice is it's a long process of sort of self-discovery, and being genuine, and also don't listen to advice. I don't know. I have this very strange feeling that most of the advice that people have given me that I didn't ask for told me more about them than it told me about me.
Yeah.
You know, people who are ready to shout advice at you, people who are ready to say, "Now listen here, young man," kind of thing.
Yeah.
Usually they're the ones not to listen to. Usually in an orchestra, there'll be someone sitting quietly, maybe at the back of the first violins or something like that, who would never dream of coming at you, but who, if you went to them and asked them quietly, could I ask you, they might tell you something really valuable. They might tell you something really that changes your whole perspective. You know,
Amazing.
If you're smart enough to identify the right person to ask the advice from.
But I do like the don't listen to unsolicited advice. I think so. It's get away from the mirror, get yourself into the situation you need to get into, you need to be in, and be the real deal. Is probably your advice.
And I think that you if you are, you will be that, and you know, and if you're not, well, you'll get found out sooner or later. And I think that's one of the great. I mean, to go back to what we've been talking about, all of the things that you can learn. I mean, I learned huge amounts about music from working with Deep Purple, and not just with Purple, but with all the other people around that. You know, people like Bruce Dickson and people like Ronnie Dio, and all these great people who were able to give me a dimension in my musical life that I wouldn't otherwise have had.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best way to learn something is in terms of something else. And sometimes I think classical musicians who are bored with playing the same old over and over again might learn something from a band that's played Smoke on the Water since 1971 hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. Or 72 maybe, I don't know. You know the years better than me.
Recorded 71 was it? They recorded it in 71. I think it probably gigged very late 71.
Right, first time. Well, the fact that you can still do that and do it with freshness and energy and involvement and commitment and not be tired of it is something we can learn a lot from on my side of the tracks.
Keeping it all fresh and making it sound like it's new to you as well as to the audience is the golden ticket, really, isn't it? Because if you're finding new avenues in it and you're finding it exciting, then the audience are as well, aren't they?
I think so. I think I mean, in the same way, actually, that orchestras pick up on the genuineness or otherwise of the conductor in front of them, audiences too. They sense, even if they don't always necessarily know exactly what they are sensing, if they couldn't put it into words, they do sense it. They sense that something real is happening, and I think that's the same whether it's a symphony orchestra on stage or a rock band or whatever it is. I'm sure if you're an actor, it's the same thing.
Yeah. That's incredible. Well, Paul, all that's left is for me to say thank you very much. You're very kind to spend your time to talk to me, and I've had such a great time chatting and learning stuff like this. I'm sure everybody who's watching this is going to join me in thanking you as well. So thank you very much.
It's really a pleasure, Nick. Thank you very much.
Wow, what do you think of that? That was really interesting. And after we finished talking, we carried on chatting for another 20-25 minutes, and there were a couple of really nice stories as well that I think maybe we'll save for another time. But clearly a really clever man, really interesting guy, and obviously the conducting area is not something that I'm incredibly familiar with, so I thought I've learned a fair bit there. His relationship with Jon, it was just magical, as you know, you probably figured out. I'm a bit of a Jon Lord guy. Really enjoy the conversation, and hopefully I'll get to see him face to face maybe later on in the year. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please let me know in the comments, like and subscribe, all the good stuff. It really is important to me, and I do read everything that you say, and I take it on board. And sometimes I will adjust what I do. I'll video particular things for you if you fancy that. So the requests really do influence what I do. And if no one watches and no one requests, I'll stop doing it. So, one of the two. Thank you for joining me for this one. It's meant a lot to me, this one, and I think Paul's a very special guest, and I'm very grateful for him to help me out. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.